A note over on the YouTube page, you'll find out that there are 15,000 subscribers out there now. Congratulations to us for getting to 15,000. I was hoping to get there in time for our anniversary show, and we made it easily in time, probably thanks to Warren. And I would imagine that that fellow we had on last week had something to do with it too. I think we did a great job with that show last week. And tonight, Warren is going to tell us how to implement all the things that we heard about last week, in theory, a little bit last week. And tonight, Warren Keller is going to tell us about the practical aspects of doing it, particularly in PixInsight. I'm going to tell you some stuff about what's coming up in the future, because there are some cool things happening in the future. And get over to the calendar. And tonight, Warren's going to be here. Randall's going to be here next week where to tell us what he wished he knew back when he was just beginning. And then Warren's buddy Ron is going to be here the week after that to tell us about some new masking tools in PixInsight. The week after that, June 4th, well, Gallery is going to have a special show about Mac imaging. And it's about 15, 20 minutes. I will have a 15, 20-minute show about off-axis guiders, and I finished writing it. I've still got a few pictures to find for it and stuff like that yesterday, so it should be ready to go. And then we also have to review what's happened in the last year, the growth of the channel, what we need from you guys, what we would like to be able to find out what to do. I would invite you to have a conversation while I'm talking about our statistics and things like that. It's only 10 minutes. You've been there before. We've had an anniversary show every early June for the last 4 or 5 years since Adam left us. So I'd also like to find out what you guys would like to see a little bit different as time goes on. Then we've got a number of other people, Bob Denny, Adam Block, and a whole lot of other people coming in. We're pretty well loaded up through July, but we need some help signing up people after that, because as you can see, we've got some blank dates, and you are the people that make the Astro Imaging channel run. So we need your help. Tonight, as you go through, see all. Oh, I've got to turn myself off here. Boink. Tonight, you can see that there's a lot of people already here, and 58 people watching right now, as I can see. A lot of places to put in a question. So go ahead and type your questions in here. We've talked to Warren about an issue that we've been having, and we've been having it for a long time. The software that we use limits us to 720 dots per inch. Okay, that's our highest resolution that we can get out of the meeting software and then the streaming software into YouTube. So we might have some difficulty seeing some of the stuff he's doing. Warren's going to try to use the magnifier and stuff like that. But the important part to note here is that it's not expected that you follow exactly what Warren or anybody else presenting a program does. You can start up your own copy of PixInsight or whatever software that's being displayed that night, and you can see all these things very well illustrated on your own copy. And what you want to do from the presenter is get the idea of what to do and the approximation of it, but you're going to have to put in your own numbers. You're going to have to shove your little points back and forth. You're going to have to be making those choices. And you're going to have your PixInsight or whatever it is screen sitting there looking at you. So the fact that we don't have as good a resolution as we might like, and it's a limitation of YouTube and the streaming software and Google Meets. Just because we don't have that doesn't mean that you can't really get anything out of the presentation. Okay, enough of that. We've been talking saxophones for the last half hour, waiting to get ready for this whole thing. So I think I will stop my sharing, and I'll introduce my good buddy. Where are we over there? Warren, it's your turn. Tell us about the secrets of X.
Thank you. Sounds like the red light district, the secrets of X. Here going. I'm going to keep this clean, everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you. And hopefully you can see that okay. Mr. Minimalist's copy of PI. So yeah, the power of X. And so everybody's a little bit hot on these Xterminators and extractions and Graxes and whatever. So the power of X. And, you know, it's interesting. Some of the recent hottest and most powerful additions to quote unquote PixInsight are actually outside third-party developed products. And, you know, Juan and Roberto have been very busy on things like the Gaia Star catalog and more astrometry and photometry type things. But for us pretty picture imagers, and I would include myself in that, again, a lot of the most exciting stuff is really coming from outside. As Alex mentioned, our friend Russ Croman from RC-Astro was on the show last week, and he's a big part of that, and very happy that he's returned to astro imaging after, I think, over a decade away, and really back with a vengeance and using his very capable mind to develop some great things, as we'll see. But another outside program as well that we'll talk about. So first thing I'm going to talk about tonight is GraXpert, the great plugin with the terrible name. In their to their credit, or you know, as an excuse, these are German fellows headed by yet another saxophonist, Frank Sackenheim, and I believe 3 others on the development team. GraXpert or GraXpert, or however you want to say it, is free, and as you can see, it supports Windows, Mac, and Linux, which is terrific. And what's really wonderful is it is a 64-bit program, and it reads and writes XISF, 32-bit floating point native PixInsight format. So you don't have to step down and lose bit depth as you would if you were going into Photoshop for something. And what it is a fantastic gradient removal tool. And as one of Terry and I were discussing before the show, in many cases, and I dare say perhaps in most, although there have been a few exceptions, I find it superior to DBE, dynamic background extraction, which is very powerful and saves a lot of images that would otherwise be doomed. But let's take a look at GraXpert. We're going to use this guy, and I wanted to keep that stretch off because when I I wanted you to take a deep breath and make sure you were sitting down, because when I do put that stretch on, when I do put that stretch on, you're going to see some extreme nastiness. So this was a one-shot color camera at New Mexico skies of all places. And of course, as a remote host, I can't tell you what all happened to this OSC master in the course of acquiring those subframes, but that's the master file. And you know, I keep saying that, and I can't think of the expression. In their defense is what I'm trying to think of. In their defense, you know, there were roll-off roofs with a lot of telescopes doing their thing, lots of LED lights, lots of activity, maintaining 6 to 8 scopes in each roll-off. So sometimes stuff happened. Now, you may be newer to PixInsight, and you may be using ABE, the automatic background extractor, which does a reasonably good job. At times, you find that you need to make a few adjustments. I think that the single most important thing is to lower the default function degree. And I'm going to reset the tool here. And I don't know if I should bother with the magnifier, but if I reset the tool, watch the function degree there. So the native is 4, and that's just way too high. So you'll find that you're often at 2 and sometimes at 1. And that really takes care of that dark halation that you'll see around bright objects. And other than that, I don't really do much if I am using it, except for, and let me reopen it, from my icon is to increase the sample box size, separate them out a little bit, and perhaps increase the tolerance a little bit. But that's really it. And of course, most cases we're using subtraction to remove additive gradients. It's good. And in a pinch, when there's just so much nebulosity and so much structure in an image that you throw your hands up, and ABE can do a pretty good job. DBE, of course, is the more powerful, superior job. We've probably gone over this a million times. There's no one right way to use it. It corrects in the same way, but using a different algorithm. And we'd want to subtract for additive gradients, light pollution, light trespass, etc. And you can place sample points automatically and then move them off of significant structures, or you can place samples manually. And again, it can do a very good job in a lot of cases. I'm not going to demonstrate DBE here, but I can tell you that it didn't do a great job, although it did a pretty good job. So what we want to do is see the same image file in GraXpert or GraXpert. I'm going to save this out on the desktop. I may already have it. Astro Imaging Channel. Yeah, it's this one. Okay, so actually when you download GraXpert for free, it doesn't install to the hard drive. It kind of sits as an executable. And I'm going to open that. It's really easy to use. You'll go up here, and of course we do want to background extract, load our image. It's this one actually. Okay, looks even worse here, doesn't it? You have an option for stretching. It's not infinitely variable, but you can remove it, put on a 10%, 15%, 20 or 30% stretch. And we do want to display the points. We'd like to see where they are. And you can adjust the points per row. I haven't really found it necessary to change really any of the defaults. The grid tolerance is really good. And you'll click Create Grid. See that, everybody? Maybe I'll put my little magnifier on there again. So just going from the top, background extraction, load image, you set your stretch here. We do want to display the points so we can see them. Shouldn't have to mess with this stuff for the most part. Create the grid. That's what I just did. And there it is. Now, it's great about avoiding stars. I think it's a bit better than DBE. And as we know, even with DBE, even if we've got something sitting right over a star, DBE knows to ignore that, but it's a waste of a sample point, right? So we'd want to put it in a more useful area. But if you notice, it's really good about avoiding stars for the most part. You can drag them around just like you would a DBE. And here, to delete a point, we right click. And so trying to get a little bit further away from the extended arms of the hamburger here. And lots of sample points in this problematic red area. You can add your own. And just, have a look, make sure nothing is amiss. And when you're ready, you'll hit Calculate Background. Now, I'll swing over there again with our magnifier. There are 3 different interpolation methods. There's RBF. I can't tell you what it stands for. It's probably in German, even if I knew what it stood for. And I know that Krieging is German. But I find, although kriging is supposed to be the higher quality algorithm, I find the default algorithm of RBF to be by far my favorite. And then when you're ready, you'll click calculate background. I'm the operator with my pocket calculator here. And when it's done, and you can see already it's done a wonderful job, you can look at the original version and the processed version, and you can also view the background itself. And as we talk about with DBE many times, right, gradients are typically large scale, very smooth structures, not really that complex. And that's really what we want to see, not bumpy, very quickly changing type of structures. And you can actually save the background if you like. I'm not sure why I wouldn't want to do that, but certainly want to save the original, save the processed version and say processed. And actually, it doesn't matter what you're viewing here, as long as you say save processed. That's exactly what it's going to do. And I want to name this something simple so I don't lose it again. And again, 32-bit XISF, extensible image serialization format, the PixInsight format. You can save it in a truncated TIFF, in FITS. I believe it's unsigned integer, but it's great to be able to move seamlessly between PI, GraXpert, and back again. So let's open that up and put a stretch on that. And that's a really, really beautiful field. We'll put a boosted auto stretch on that. And I think in this case, you're running right now to download GraXpert. Should have cropped beforehand. I see a little bit of problem over there on the border. That's something that you would want to do, but no big deal at all. So we'll come back to this in a minute. So let's move on to the RC-Astro plugins, Russell Croman. Russell's been melting a lot of chocolate in his pantry, training some very powerful computers in machine learning branch of artificial intelligence, very carefully curating the data sets that he feeds into the computer with regard to the deconvolution process, which is BXT, the noise reduction process, which is NoiseXTerminator, and the star removal plugin, StarXTerminator. And I also have StarNet 2 open here as well. And StarNet 2 is free. And Nikita Misiura, who gave us the original StarNet++ and StarNet 1, offers StarNet 2 free. It's easy to install, and it works very, very well. I would say that at this point, StarXTerminator is starting to move a bit ahead of StarNet 2, not so much in the overall performance, but as we'll see in a little bit, as of the last revision, StarXTerminator is very good at separating stars from non-stellar objects like very small background galaxies and such. And I was kvetching to Russ when working on very high resolution type of images that H2 regions, that hydrogen alpha H2 regions, knots as we often call them in galaxies, are not being broken out and being identified as stars and being pulled out to the star image rather than staying where they belong in the galaxy. And Russ had some very exciting news that that's one of the big revisions that he'll have coming fairly soon. I was able to load him up some images that were problematic for me. In my workflow, I was just masking the galaxy out of the star removal so that I could maintain those H2 regions in the galaxy. So we'll look at BXT, BlurXTerminator, first. And for those of you who have been with PI for a while, perhaps read my one of my two versions of Inside PixInsight or some of the other good books that have been out there, you know, the deconvolution process was a very time-consuming one. We had to create a range mask, a brightness range mask to help protect dark, dim, weak signal areas from potentially being sharpened during the deconvolution process. We needed something called a LDSI, a local deringing support image, to protect large, bright stars, such as that would be a perfect example. We had to determine a PSF, a point spread function, either with the dynamic PSF process or perhaps the PSF image script if you happen to have installed that. And at the end of the day, it really wasn't a particularly great result. It would tighten stars a bit. It would enhance details in our object of interest, such as galaxies and nebulae, in somewhat of an artificial, sharpened way, rather than a true, legitimate deconvolving, a removing of blurring, is what we really look to deconvolution to do. There was also a function on the motion blur that you could round out elongated stars a bit. That worked okay. But again, what we found is a rather artificial, I called them worm-like, bright highlights being exaggerated rather than truly deblurred. And it was so a lot of work for a little bit of gain. And I had actually spoken to Russ at AIC, Advanced Imaging Conference, San Jose, a year ago, and he said, "Oh, I'm working on something." I said, "Boy, if we could harness the protective nature of PI's deconvolution, where it's so gentle to the image and doesn't beat it up, like for instance some better algorithms like MaximDL would be an example, which really do deblur very well but beat the living heck out of the image." But again, this algorithm was just not quite right. Juan had stated that it was something he had written 13 years ago, and he was willing to take a look at again, but it wasn't happening, and I'm doubtful that it would have happened. So I'm very, very grateful for BlurXTerminator.
Warren?
Yes.
Before we get completely away from GraXpert, Linda asked about, do you think that the developer is planning a PI plugin version?
I do not know. I'm not overly concerned because, like I said, it's pretty seamless, but it would be great if they do it. Anything else?
No, that's the only question.
All right.
Just a second, Warren. It should be noted that on June 25th, Frank himself will be here with a much longer in-depth show.
That's awesome.
About GraXpert. Okay.
That's awesome. I will. I'll be sure to be here for that if I can. That sounds great.
And because of the tyranny of time, Warren is trying to cover 4 different things here. He's just not going to be able to go into depth on any of them really, but he'll give you an introduction that you really could use. Okay. Thanks, Warren.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'll tuck this guy away over here, and I'm going to pull up a luminance from a monochromatic camera of a rather high resolution Southern pinwheel M83, and I'm going to grab my STF, my screen transfer function, right? Because it's a little bit bright. I like to dial it down so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. And let's take a good look at BlurXTerminator. So Russell had told me that Juan and he had exchanged some really nice emails talking about classical deconvolution. And in the end, Juan was absolutely convinced that BlurXTerminator was indeed true deconvolution. Although it is AI magic, it's not something that's creating details artificially that don't exist. You see some of this stuff out on the net. It's not doing that. Again, it's a carefully curated data set from different focal lengths, different systems, and the computer understands what these details look like at different focal lengths and tries to remove the atmospheric blurring of our images. So it is deconvolution, but it's very advanced deconvolution. Remember when we were looking at the PI native decon, we talked about feeding it a fixed PSF, which that point spread function represented the average star in the field. But as we know, that can vary quite a bit across the image itself, especially if we have any distortion, coma, elongation, whatever it is, tilt. And so stars can really vary throughout the image, both in PSF and also in their eccentricity, how round they are. So this is literally looking at everything in the field, doing millions, perhaps, and quote our friend Carl Sagan, billions and billions of calculations in a very short time, looking at each star on its own merit and looking at each detail in its own merit as well. And to that end, it is a fantastic amount of computation going on. And as I said, in Russ's case, a lot of chocolate was melted in that pantry. So I want you to be sure, if you do have an NVIDIA video card in your computer, make sure that you're aware of how to do graphical processor acceleration for these very plugins, for StarNet 2, for Russ's BXT, NXT, and SXT, right? Using something called CUDA with an NVIDIA card. It's not very hard to set up. It's very well worth it. And I can tell you that it will take you from minutes of processing time to seconds of processing time. So by all means, check that out. Now, Apple users, Mac users, they seem to do very well with this stuff without having to go through something like that. But with a Windows system, it's pretty much a prerequisite to have it. So BlurXTerminator, I think it's about $100 now. It's well worth it. And remember that Russ offers discounts once you own one of his products, even if it's one of the Photoshop plugins like Gradient Xterminator or Star Shrink. You'll get a discount when you buy any additional plugins. So when you download it, you'll have to select the AI, the artificial intelligence, the latest version of the machine learning. And the installation will also automatically, under resources, updates, check for manage repositories. It'll put in these repositories to Russ, RC-Astro.com, NoiseXTerminator, StarXTerminator, BlurXTerminator. So it makes it easier for updates to come through. But when you do have a new, what we call AI, a new version of the training, you want to make sure that you get the latest and the greatest. And so it's broken up into two separate sections: stellar adjustments, we know that what that is, the stars, and non-stellar adjustments, the details, right? The structures within our objects of interest. Two separate things. And then we have some convenience options at the bottom here. You do have a real-time preview, And sometimes real-time previews are wonderful to experiment on. And then sometimes, if you're like me, you find that critical comparison and testing, you really need to go to standard previews so that rather than just toggling on, off, you can try different settings and then compare them easily. So let's look at the stellar adjustments first. I'll open a real-time preview. And I am going to zoom in on some stars. And I like to keep, yes.
Warren, could you move the window? Yeah, the pane, could you move it towards the picture a little bit more so that when we manipulate the screen to make it bigger, it's easier to see? Yeah, just pull that window.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Like
yeah,
that. Okay.
Yeah. Then when we blow it up, it'll be right there.
Right. Don't blow it up too hard now. Okay, so looking at the stellar adjustments initially, and of course we toggle before and after up here in a real-time preview, right? And so you'll notice just a nice gentle tightening of those stars. And I am generally at 0.08 or 9. I'll go really extreme here. And you will start to get a bit of a ringing artifact, although never as much as a typical deconvolution. But I'm going to say you're going to be somewhere in that 0.10. It's doing a really great job. Now you also have a halo adjustment. I don't use this a lot. You know, I'm a person, I like halos. I like color in halos. They tend to deposit there. But you have the power here of reducing the size of those halos, the larger ones typically, what we're going for. Watch this here. So it's before and after, before and after. You see that halo coming down as well. Some of us might even like larger halos where they don't exist, again, particularly in the color image, to deposit more color in those outer areas. You'll find you'll have to click on that toggle before or after a few times, because there's a lot of computation again going on in the background. Sometimes it's not as easy as just undo, redo, undo, redo kind of a thing. So I'm going to set this back to about 0. That's where I usually am. I'll call your attention already though. Oops. Bear with me a second. I'm going to navigate back to the previous preview and do that again. You'll notice already how impressive the development of detail is in some of the background galaxies and such. And for a real mind blower, I'm going to move over here. Watch these couple of guys here. Before and after. Before and after. So that's pretty incredible. You can actually see some structure here in the core of these little tiny galaxies. It's very impressive. So we're now looking at non-stellar adjustments. And really, we want to focus on our main object of interest, M83. So I'll get in there a little bit closer. Maybe I want to darken that up a little bit again so I can really see what I'm doing. Now, we're currently on the automatic PSF, the auto PSF selection, and it does a really great job at auto PSF. But it turns out that more times than not, in my experience, we can do better with actually knowing what the average PSF of the stars are there. And so to do that, I think I will close out of here. And the first thing I will do is actually get the PSF. And I'm going to use, there's 3 different tools that I know of that you can use to do this. I'm going to use the dynamic PSF process, which is what many of us would have used to determine a PSF for the native, the old school deconvolution. And it's a good idea to try to stay on axis. And I'm just going to choose this guy right here. And I see that the amplitude under the A column is 0.8. And that's pretty good. It's not saturated as a 1.0 star would be saturated. So it's close, but that's pretty good. Maybe we'll try this, which may be too dim. And at 0.1, it is too dim. How about something in the middle like that? It's 0.4. That's not bad at all. So if I want to get rid of this guy, I'm going to hit my little subtract button. And now I've got these 2 here. And we can see that in the X and the Y axes, we're right about 5, right? 4.99, 4.96. So maybe 4.9 we'll use as our average. I'm a bit silly sometimes. I'll get the calculator out. I'm not the fastest with numbers, but let's say 4.9. This is a dynamic process, so I'm going to have to close it with the red X. Remember 4.9. And now let's take a traditional, standard preview, Alt-N of the galaxy itself. And we'll zoom out to about there. And let's make another copy and copy the zoom and the pan position. And on this one, we're going to try the auto PSF. And you notice my current sharpness is at 0.75. And I think we're all on the same page that deconvolution isn't a quote unquote, it's not a sharpener. It's not a sharpener like an edge sharpener filter, which is a artificial simulation of sharpness by increasing what we call acutance, increasing the contrast between lights and darks, between edges of objects. That can do great stuff, but it's artificial. Deconvolution is the method, as I mentioned before. My buddy Ron, who will be on next week, Ron Breacher, he says taking the cream out of the coffee, which is a pretty good trick. But that cream is that atmospheric blurring. And if we can know what the PSF looks like, what the coffee originally looked and tasted like, we can extract the cream out to restore the sharpness without the blurring, rather than, again, artificially sharpening it. And so that's what deconvolution is all about and what it should do. But Russ freely uses the term sharpen. This is really shrinking, tightening stars. This is really, enhancing non-stellar detail. But I'll take sharpen. It's fine. But just want you to know the idea behind that. So let's apply auto PSF at 0.75. And of course, with the standard preview, I'm going to Control-Shift-Z, Control-Shift-Z. I'm going to go before and after. I'm going to move in a little bit closer so we can see that better. Before and after. And I don't know if we're going to have any lag, but it's really important that we kind of get this right. Before and after, because it's really profound, right? We don't see worms. We don't see artificial kind of enhancement of bright spots. We see revelation of legitimate detail. And something we never saw with the native decon is the same effect on dark structures. So the dark lanes are being enhanced equally as well. Whereas again, the old deconvolution really left that on the table. So I think that's pretty tremendous. Now, let's go over to, let's match that zoom and pan. And let's go over to here. And now, rather than the auto PSF, let's put in our 4.9 that we decided on for PSF. Let's apply it to this one. And how about, just so we keep it straight, we'll call this one auto. And we'll call this one PSF. I'm going to use my control key, hold that down, and I'm going to use my side arrow keys. And we're going to toggle between PSF and auto. PSF and auto. And in this case, man, it's really, really close. Very, very close. In fact, let's see. I'm looking right here, and I'm going to try to bring that into view for us. And I'm also going to match that zoom and pan over here. So now we can see a fairly significant difference. So this is auto, and this is the manual PSF. Auto, manual PSF. Now, that's not the be-all, end-all, because it could be that we would need to manipulate the amount of sharpening to match. Does that make sense to everybody? So what if I go over to the auto, and this time I increase the sharpening there to 0.85 instead of 0.75? I'm sorry, I messed up. Let's check automatic. And so this is PSF, and this is auto. And so the PSF is still doing significantly better job of sharpening there, even by increasing the sharpening that much. If I go all the way to 1.0, and you see what I did, I messed up. Applied it to the PSF. Let's do it to this one. Why do you people let me do this? And let's go back to 0.75. He's a loose cannon. And manual.
The beauty of live television.
Yes. Okay, so we're back on track. So manual, PSF, auto. Now it's interesting, because now there's legitimately some stuff that are popping up. Look at these little tiny H2s, like right to the right of that cursor. So that's the manual PSF, and that's the auto, and they virtually disappear. So you really have to use your discernment and study pretty carefully. Now, if you're shooting with a modest focal length, a wide field refractor, or even up to, let's say, 500, 600 millimeters, it's been kind of common to see people say, it doesn't do much. BlurXTerminator, it's okay. It may not do dramatic kinds of things that we've seen here at 0.4 arc seconds. And I'm not a rich guy, so don't be jealous of me. This is not my telescope. We have Telescope Live, we have iTelescope, we have access to this data if it's something that we're interested in, and we can't afford a 1 meter or a half meter or something. But even so, from that point of, let's say, around closer to 1,000 millimeters to like 2.5 meter focal length, you're going to see some very exciting stuff happening in that range. So now what I'm going to do is, now that we've established that the PSF is a bit better than the auto PSF, I am going to put the correct first feature on. So this is interesting. So it does correct, but this may yield a slightly better result by correcting first before sharpening. And I'm finding that I like this, that it does that and even one step better. So let's see if it bears out on this particular image. So now we're getting a little cooked, because this is our PSF, and this is now PSF correct first. And it did do a even better job, but it's starting to get a little wormy and a little artificial looking. So how about we take that down to 70. Getting more in the ballpark there. How about 60? And you notice, you may notice, I always like to use my new instance to drag and drop. And that's because even though function 5 or clicking the apply button are great, sometimes it's safer to point right to an image or a view or a preview that you're actually working on to make sure that it's the one that's actually being having the application done to it, because sometimes another image might be active and we don't realize it. So now we're
Warren,
yes.
I think that some of the subtleties between the selections that you're making aren't really coming through
Yeah,
on YouTube. So just, advise us what you think or zoom in a little further.
Yeah, so that's too bad, but I zoomed in further, and we're getting down to, as Eric says, it's going to be hard to see. So yeah, I a lot of times I like correct first, but be advised that it's going to be a little bit hotter, a little bit sharper than without, and you'll probably want to move down with your sharpness. Now, correct only is interesting, and I'm going to move on to another image. And this is just a corner of a whale and crowbar image. And we're going to get down into this corner where you'll notice quite a bit of elongation there on those stars. And that was probably before I had a flattener on this Ritchie Chrétien. And so let's say you're working with chrominance rather than luminance, or you're working with one-shot color, right? All you've got is an RGB master. If that's all I have with a one-shot color camera, then I do want to take advantage of some of the deblurring. But with chrominance from a monochromatic camera, perhaps I just want to correct only, because if I have luminance to come in after the fact, that's really going to drive the sharpness, the contrast, and the detail. Maybe I've got chromaticism, false chromatic aberration. Maybe I've got out of round stars like here. So let's see what this does for us. So as you can see, before, after, before, after, right? Hopefully we can see that. Really does a nice job. It always strives for that round PSF. It always assumes that the stars are round. So that's another way that we can use BlurXTerminator. Okay, so let's move on to NoiseXTerminator, unless there's any questions here. There's a couple of other.
There's one that came up,
Yep.
Warren. Do you recommend masking before you apply BlurXTerminator?
So the answer to that is a hearty no, because it turns out that Russ is training this in the presence of noise, right? So the algorithm knows to look through and past that noise, expects it to be there. And so so no. Now there may be some extenuating cases where you'll notice that maybe an area is being affected in a way that you're not happy with. You could certainly come in with a mask and give it a try, but just be advised, when we run any type of deconvolution, we want it to be as pristine and as linear and unaltered as it can be. And so in this case, I would say, no, the beauty of this is you don't have to worry about a mask. It knows what it's looking for.
Warren, Warren, before you started down comparing the automatic PSF and stuff, Brian asked, does Warren recommend, I think you probably answered this, is what I'm saying. Does Warren recommend using an automatic PSF or should we calculate our own? There's a lot of confusing
Yeah.
information, Brian says.
And that was probably before the
Yeah,
demo.
it was before you
Right? So,
went on the
so what I stated was the auto PSF does a really nice job, but as you can see, when the detail is there, that you'll do better with the manual PSF.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let's return to that awful image. Now that we got GraXpert, and I'd be interested to see how Frank actually says this, because GraXpert sounds a lot better than GraXpert. And so we would want to do what now? We would want to probably, after cropping and after BlurXTerminator. So let's run a quick BlurXTerminator on this so that we can move on to NoiseXTerminator. But I thought that high res M83 was a really good demonstration. I am going to just take a quick look here at this. And let's go over to our NGC 3625. Really, really great. So look at that dust lane there. Hopefully you can see that. Before, after, before, after. Move a little bit closer. Before, after, before, after. And I think that's close enough for rock and roll, as they say. So I'm going to apply that. Always good idea to check your work. You know, toggle before, after, Control Z, Control Y, zoom in, make sure things are cool. NoiseXTerminator is even easier to use than is BlurXTerminator, and it's also less costly. I think it's more in the $60 range. But for those of us who have taught noise reduction with PixInsight, multi-scale linear transform, MLT being the tool of choice for linear noise reduction, and TGV denoise, total generalized variation denoise, being our tool of choice for nonlinear smoothing. They're a lot harder to use. They take a lot more time to dial in. And although they do a really good job, they do not do as good a job as does NoiseXTerminator, because again, through the blessing and the curse, because we know there's a lot of stuff to come with AI, but through the blessing here of AI training on noise of astro images specifically, right? This isn't, I was trying to think of that other company where they're training on you know, generic terrestrial type of images. This is trained on astro images and deep sky and different systems and different levels of noise. So it really understands what it looks like and what it is. And look at the result of that denoise. So it's just, you know, how much noise reduction do you want? 100%? 50%, or anything in between. The only other parameter here is the detail slider. And as any of us that have been in PI for a while know, there are very useful mouse overs, hoverable pop-ups in all the tools that give us really good information. So sometimes people are quick to indict that there might not be documentation, although Russ has good documentation on his tools. Be willing to read those pop-ups because they are very useful. This tells us that this is essentially a unsharp mask type of sharpening. So exactly what I was talking about before, right? Artificial edge sharpening, occutants, and unsharp masking is actually not that sophisticated an algorithm. It actually goes back to the literal dark rooms of the 1930s, you know, a technique where you blurred an image to ultimately sharpen it. But the good thing about this detail function is that it's noise aware. So it's not going to reintroduce noise when it sharpens. However, in my experience, I'm no longer using it. I feel like I can get a better result on sharpening with either MLT or MMT, multi-scale median transform, later on in the workflow, after we're delinearized, after we're ready to really start enhancing detail. I just don't see any point. I'll tell you that the default is 0.15, and it really will do no harm. You really don't even hardly see anything happening until 0.15 or 0.25. But honestly, for me, I've reached the point where I just leave it alone. I've really been pretty lazy and comfortable with the results I'm getting on most images at 100% denoising, because again, it's so aware of what it's looking for and so forgiving of the legitimate structure that it does a great job full on. And I find that even when you're down to 0.9 and 0.95, you start to see a little bit of orange peel back again. Some folks are more comfortable with noise. Some folks really like a smooth image. I like a smooth image. I don't like noise. But that said, I don't like plastic and over smoothed and artificial looking either. So you'll notice there is no real-time preview available in XT, and that may come. I'm not sure. But right now we would have to use a standard preview. So again, I'm in the Alt-N. And if you ever forget the keyboard shortcuts, remember that you can right-click in a view and it opens a context menu and you have access to many things, one of which being the mode, which is the cursor mode. So we can go from the standard default readout mode to the new preview mode, or the very useful the pan mode, either with keyboard shortcuts or again, simply by getting into the context menu. So I'm going to get some dark, noisier, dim signal background sky, and I'm also going to get our galaxy. Remember that you can change the stretch on a preview. It can be different than the main image. These are independent. So as long as the check mark is checked, you're tracking the preview, and so you can I'm going to relink those channels up so I can kind of move them all together, and you can darken that, whatever you need to do. I always say the STF is there to do our bidding. If we're doing noise reduction and we want to brighten things up so we can really see that noise, we can do this. If we need to see detail being enhanced here, we can do this and darken things up. But right now, I want to see what this is doing. And I'm going to position this nice for us here and apply that. So obviously after, before,
Warren, could you
Yeah.
give us a little bit more time on each example that you're giving us rather than just flipping back and forth that quick? Because remember, we've got all sorts of streaming that has to take place. and
Yes,
stuff like that.
absolutely. Absolutely. So this was our result at 1.0. And I'm going to back up now to the before, and we'll let that sit for a few seconds. So study, how well it's doing on the lion's share of the noise. And then as we get into the outer extension of the galaxy, note this as well. And then finally, when we get into the detailed dark lane, because you can see there is noise throughout, right? So let's go after and before and after. So this is being maintained beautifully, not really losing any detail in here. I'll look for tiny little details, like something like that, and I'll say, okay, is that disappearing? Is this disappearing? Is the legitimate structure sticking with us, even though the small pixelated noise is disappearing. So let's do this. Let's create a new preview. Let's drag and drop again to match the zoom and pan levels. And something you may not know, which is newer, if you hold the Alt key down and drag and drop, you'll see a little curve appear there. And that's going to make sure that our stretch levels are the same as well. So let's go here. And now let's dial this back to 0.9. And you may have images that are smooth enough where you're going to be more in the 0.5 range. But in this case, and a lot of my stuff, I'm more in the 0.9 to 1.0. And so this has got a little bit of that orange peel back again. Hope you can see that. I'm trying to move slowly so Alex doesn't hit me. And I'm going to drag and drop that over here. And so the difference between 1.0 and 0.90, 1.0, 0.90, and maybe you decide to split the difference, up to you. But when you're ready, go ahead and apply to the, well, let me change this to 0.95. And many people ask, should I do color calibration first before noise reduction? Certainly deconvolution, certainly BlurXTerminator first. Just a good practice to get that out of the way when the image is pristine, right? To me, there's very little difference in whether you reduce noise or color calibrate. But I do, if you look at my chronological stack, I'm generally color calibrating before I'm doing the noise reduction. I just think that's a good idea, but not critical. So we've got a really nice, smooth image here. And a lot of people also say, well, providing that I'm going to remove the stars, when should I remove the stars? When should I remove the stars? Of course, we know some narrowband presentation, we wind up removing stars and leaving it out for aesthetic reasons. Typically with broadband, RGB, we wind up putting those stars back in. But although I try to work meticulously and I don't cheat because I want the best results I can get, I don't like doing extra or unnecessary work. And so my feeling is, so where are we here? This is a one-shot color master. I don't have a luminance to come. I have not color calibrated, it turns out. So let's do that really quickly with the older, easy, standard color calibration. And I'm just going to get myself a background sample. And I am going to point it to processed preview 01 as the background reference image. And let's just do a real quick color calibration on that and restretch. And let's adjust that stretch. That's something that freaks a lot of people out, right? So it's all, remember, it's all temporary visualization. Nothing really has changed other than what we've done to the image. It's just that the statistics have changed significantly and we need to do a new stretch. So point being, I don't want to have to do a lot of extra work. So I'm going to stretch the image, right? Delinearize the image, sometimes with masked stretch, but more times with histogram transformation. And I often use the drag and drop new instance method. I'll turn off the stretch, however, rather than just applying it willy-nilly. I'll open a real-time preview. And then I really want to get a good look at my histogram. And I'll either use the scroll wheel of the mouse or type in a zoom amount. And I can see that I'm a bit clipped here. It's telling me that I'm 60,000 pixels clipped, but that's about really where the data starts. And it is quoting a bit of clipping, but remember we discovered there was a little border that actually should have been cropped out from the beginning. Notice too, though, how big of a gap we have up here in the preview before it thinks that the data is really starting. So in that case, I'm going to use my eye and my brain and say, to heck with the numbers. I'm just going to make an appropriate level of darkness there that I think is good. Look at all that lost contrast there and that washed out look there, and it seems to be more appropriate right there. And more times than not, this spike will approach that midpoint, right? I know this isn't supposed to be a lesson on stretching and such, but I'm just trying to get this image to a point where, okay, so when should I remove the stars? Well, I like stars to be a bit color saturated as well. And so I'm going to do that before I'm going to remove the stars. Now, of course, many of us know how to make good quality star masks. And if we have star masks and we have something like the game script to isolate the galaxies, it's not absolutely necessary that we remove the stars, but it's a great tool and it does make processing a whole lot easier sometimes. So let's say we're going to add a little bit of color saturation. We know that we really need a mask now, right? I'm going to use the RGB working space process at a 1:1:1 luminance lightness coefficients, it really should be called, rather than luminance. And it doesn't change the image in any way. It just makes the extraction of a grayscale lightness component out of that image using the lab mode, makes it equal contribution from all three of the color channels. As this is a mask, I like to make it a bit more efficient. If darks protect and lights select, then I should make my darks darker and perhaps my lights lighter, so it works a bit more efficiently. This is this one. I'm going to reset the zoom and open a real-time preview. So I can use the auto clip if I want to darken that background up a little bit. Maybe I go a little bit further into the halos of the galaxies, maybe something like that. Maybe I brighten that stuff up a bit. And remember, it's already smooth, so we don't have to worry about any noise reduction on this particular mask. There are many ways to apply a mask. I'm going to use the old drag and drop on the view's left border there, and I'm going to hide my mask for a second. And we are revealing the high signal areas that we want to color enhance, and we are protecting with opaque red in this case the areas where we do not want any chromatic noise to come back up. And I'm going to use the curves transformation. I've got it preset on the saturation tab in a saturation curve. And as we can see, it's doing a pretty nice job of adding some pretty color saturation there. I'm going to apply it to the image behind it. And we're now going to get a double hit because this is a preview, right? And that's much too much. But if I wanted to perhaps add a little bit more and just kind of check how my stars are doing, is there any star or any object in the field that's already getting too hot, too colorful, this and that. In this case, I think that's fine. And so all of that really has taken us to, this would be a great time to remove the stars for further processing on the galaxies. Let's use StarXTerminator. I got bullied into buying StarXTerminator by Ron and by Pete. And those are my partners, if you're not aware, at our masters of PixInsight.com. It's a great place to come and learn the particulars of this stuff. We do have, we're in the process of redoing the website, but on this primer and previews page, it's going to be on our new quick start page, which will be the very first thing you come to, but it's going to be a free quick start guide into PI with pre-processing, post-processing, but view these 5 primer videos. These are all no charge, and they're really very enlightening at mastersofpixinsight.com on how to navigate, how the tools work, how the workspace works, all of that good stuff. But they said, you know, you got to get StarXTerminator. They're like, well, StarNet 2 does a pretty good job, and but what can I tell you? I'm cheap. So StarNet 2, again, its weakness right now today, and it probably is not something that's going to be further trained. So what you got is what you get with StarNet 2, although it is free, and it's very good. But the one thing I see that SXT, StarXTerminator, by Russ Croman, RC-Astro, does better is isolate small background structures, non-stellar, from stars, small galaxies, et cetera, but easy to use. And really just one function, creating a star mask, providing that you intend to add the stars back into the image. I wish Nikita didn't call this a mask, because it really isn't a mask. It's the star image. SXT, not really any more complicated. In some problematic cases, large overlap. It uses tiling to get the job done. That can help. I've never had to use it. Just like we saw in StarNet 2 with his star mask. Again, it's not a mask. Russ says generate the star image. So unless it's narrowband and we can say, oh, I know I don't want those stars again, I'm going to replace it with RGB stars, or I'm leaving the stars out because I like the way the nebula looks, you would uncheck that if you didn't need the stars. The only other thing is this unscreen stars. And this is interesting. And this is something that Russ actually came to after AIC a couple of years ago, a year ago, when he was on his way back home to Texas. And this is a Photoshop term. It's the screen blend mode, if you're familiar with layers in Photoshop. Unscreened stars is interesting. It's not generally necessary unless you have stars sitting right atop a bright and colorful object like a nebula or galaxy. I think Russ has a example somewhere where he's using the Trifid Nebula, you know, this bright, colorful nebula, and those big stars that get pulled out of there actually, when they get put back in on a straight add, in addition with pixel math, just image plus stars, they get discolored and they get dim. And so that's when rescreening the stars becomes really important with pixel math. And that's what this is all about. But in most cases, you would find that even if you had that unchecked, the stars would go back without really any artifact. But that's it. And it's capable of batch processing, but we're just going to apply it to a single image. And again, thanks to CUDA and NVIDIA, which, by the way, my NVIDIA card is a pain in the rear in other areas. It can be very intrusive, but in this case, it's really it's a must-have. So look what I did. I see I had a mask on in the background, but it did what it needed to do regardless. So here's all of our stars, right? And let's take this mask off. And I goofed. Okay, so let's do that again. Let's back up. Let's remove the mask or make it inactive. I'm going to get rid of those stars. Do this again. Always look for that brown color on your view identifier tab to make sure that a mask is or isn't active and applied at the time. As Molly says, the beauty of live television. So there's our stars. Did a beautiful job of that. And not the best example. The M83 would be a better example, but you can see that it really left non-stellar things in the field, didn't take them away as stars. Even if it took them away, when we put them back in, they'd be back. We wouldn't lose them. But it's nice to be able to have non-stellar stuff in this non-stellar image in case we want to sharpen them or increase their contrast as well. So this is my time to really have at it. I'm going to do my local histogram equalization for contrast, my multi-scale median transform for sharpening. I'm going to do some histogram adjustments. I'm going to do more color saturation to the galaxies only using the game script, which is another must-have. And if you're not familiar with that, you can drop me or drop us a line. And that's the way I would use StarXTerminator. Now, in one of my pixel math icons, and I just did a tutorial on this, did you know that you can comment out expressions in a single pixel math instance with 2 forward slashes? So you could store a bunch of these and not have to have a million pixel math icons on your desktop. But if I were ready to rescreen this, I would take the slashes out. You see this becomes active. And what I would do is, again, rather than a straight add, which in this case, notice the name of the image, name of the view would be processed plus processed stars, rather than a straight add, which works much of the time. I'm going to do a rescreening because I unscreened the stars with StarXTerminator when I removed them. And so I would use this expression, except I've got to substitute the actual names of the images again, and LRGB would become processed. And in this case, it's just an RGB, right? You can see I typically work with monochromatic images, although I do a fair amount of one shot as well. And this would be processed stars. Okay, that in the expression editor. And this would now put the stars back in a rescreening method. And there you go. And of course, you can alter those stars. You can add more saturation. You can shrink them with morphological transformation. Many of you are familiar with Bill Blanchard. He has a really nice star minimization pixel math expression, which happens after the fact. But I think I've run my mouth enough. If there was any time, and I'll let somebody tell me if there is, or I should just shut up. Nobody is.
We never want you to shut up, Warren. But
okay, all right.
You held your audience pretty well. There is a question here.
Yep.
Let's see if I get this right. Can you comment on how to moderate background brightness of starred and starless images to get the best recombination?
So I think I kind of get where that's going. What I wanted to show is, it's interesting. This is the star image, right? Look at the readout mode when I read out in the background. Notice that it is absolutely black, 0.00 in all 3 channels. So that's one really great thing to keep in mind, that there is no adjustment necessary with regard to that. When I'm in a starless image, I'll notice that the histogram processed. The histogram is going to read quite differently sometimes And this is a particularly insane one, so don't pay that any mind. But you'll find that when you get in here, that when the stars were in, the histogram reads in a way that now that they're out, you might want to make some adjustments here. And because that background I showed you, the stars were zeros, you could darken this background a bit for additional contrast. And I find that something like that, coarse curves to maybe bring up the halos in this tail of the 3625 galaxy. But I don't have any problem putting them back together. I hope that answers. Okay. I was going to do two things. I was going to go to M83 for a SXT and SN2 comparison. Before I do that, I just want to beg your indulgence to jump back to GraXpert or GraXpert. And now I'm using the control key with the page down key on the keyboard. So this was after DBE. There was some really nasty kind of circular concentric gradient. And I just wanted you to see that GraXpert did quite a bit better job on that as well. So, all right, I'm messing with your minds here. I'm going to go back to M83 and we'll go to the main view here. In fact, I'm going to delete these previews. And this is linear. Let's go ahead and see how we do on a linear image with SXT. I'm generally doing this nonlinear images. But in the later trainings, you know, it's been more possible to get good results with linear images. So let's see how this did. So note how well SXT did on recognizing non-stellar objects. It left all of these little tiny background galaxies without taking them along for the ride. And again, I like having them here because I might want to enhance them in the same way as the main galaxy in the LRGB, usually not working independently on illuminance before LRGB combination. So we'll call this star field SXT. And now let's go to free StarNet 2. And let's create the star mask and apply that. A couple of different options here. Never had to upsample. This is really strange linear data because what SN2 does is it stretches and then it unstretches. And I don't really know how you can unstretch something without damaging it. So let's see. So what just happened? I know what happened. We didn't put the stars back in. And let's run this again. Okay, here's our linear stars. And SN2 did a really bad job on a linear image. So that's kind of new to me because, again, I'm not typically removing stars from a linear image, but you can see how much better SXT did. So let's give it the fighting chance, and let's do a quick stretch on this. M83L, and let's just do a very quick drag and drop. And this is what you see most people doing. I don't like that. I really like to take this, remove the stretch, and adjust what I brought over before I actually apply. But in the interest of time, we do that, and we will rerun SXT. Sorry, SN2, StarNet 2. It should do a whole lot better on a nonlinear image. And it always comes out with that stretch on. You'll see the green line. It automatically has that stretch on, and it kind of scares you a little bit when it does that. Now, it did leave a fair amount of galaxies. And so it did quite well on this one. But honestly, I'm not going to take your time. I should have set up an experiment so you could see the two back to back. And I know from having run this before that SXT leaves quite a few more galaxies than does SN2. I wonder if that's the wrong one. I'm looking for M83L star mask. I wonder if we could see some galaxies in here if we looked closely enough. But you'll take my word for it. It does do a little bit better job of leaving the non-stellar stuff behind. All right, so I think I'll cool it there, and I'll take any questions that I can, if there are any. Hello.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're just unmuting our mics more.
Okay.
Give us a moment.
Okay.
Where are
I
we
think it's,
here?
I'm trying to understand Josh Kovich's question.
Okay.
The one
Can
with
you
the
combine
parentheses?
ST stars, OP screen instead? I'm not sure what that means.
Say
I
that
guess
again, Eric.
Well, I'm trying to read.
Right. Right.
Can you combine $$ $T stars OP screen
I
instead?
think, Josh, are you suggesting another formula
Yeah.
for
that sounds-
combining
Yeah.
the
That
two?
sounds like an
this is
alternate.
just, okay,
that
this is
sounds-
just a way of combining.
Yeah,
All
it
right,
sounds like
I'm
an
sorry.
alternate pixel math expression, not one I'm exactly familiar with, but it may well work. This
Is
is
is it fair to say that there are several expressions
yes,
in use?
it is
Yeah.
fair, and it's probably oftentimes with these expressions they're doing the same or roughly the same thing with different language.
Mhm. Okay.
So I have another question. There are various stretches. You've kind of used the default screen transfer function or some adjustment on that for a stretch. What do you
Right.
think of the arc sign stretch in order to maintain star color, and then
Right.
putting those back to a starless image where galaxy color is developed independently?
Right. I do not like ArcSign stretch. At least I do not like PI's implementation of ArcSign stretch. And it may be a perfectly fine one. It just occurs to me that for many years before PixInsight, many Photoshop users would use NASA's FITS Liberator to stretch their images. And it used ArcSign stretch as one of the main methods, and it did a really good job. So again, I don't want to indict PI's implementation of it, but here's the thing. Are you familiar with masked stretch? So you'll notice it's the only other intensity transformation other than curves and such, but actual delinearizers that I've got on my desktop. And masked stretch is great, and it does just what you're saying. It attempts to keep the core color and detail, but at the expense of a bit of contrast, right? So mask stretch is what I'll use for more wide field images that don't have tremendous detail, maybe don't need that monster contrast, maybe have a lot of stars, and I'm really trying to minimize them from the get-go. So I really like mass stretch. And what I call arcsine stretch is mass stretch on steroids. In other words, it's too compressing. It's so limiting that you tend to get a lot of artifacts, particularly in the cores of stars and stuff, because the color is so intensely compressed by these internal masks that it's, to me, more trouble than it's worth. You'll find that even with masked stretch, there is a routine with a script called the repaired HSV separation script, which is a really good idea to run before mass stretch to avoid exactly what we're talking about, those star core artifacts where you get a bright pink or a bright blue dot in the middle of your stars. But for me, arcsine stretch is just way over the top and something that I don't use anymore.
Is it fair to say that perhaps there could be a little more work done on AI stretches to get color and to avoid artifacts?
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. I mean, again, I'm friendly with Russ, but I'm not necessarily in the loop all the time. I've been a beta tester on some of this stuff, but wouldn't it be great to have some development with that same technology for delinearization? Because that's a big time consumer of what we do, trying to really make those ideal, optimal stretches, which oftentimes are kind of a compromise, right? Where we have to serve the image as a whole, even though we're going to need to come back in and boost certain areas, extensions and such more with curves. So that would be really cool.
And Norm had another question here that just came up. Should you crop the image right after stacking? Doesn't the stacking artifact discoloration affect the background neutralization effort?
Yeah, so two things. So now WBPP, right, weighted batch preprocessing, offers the auto crop feature, which will crop the image automatically to the field where 100% of the subs fall. And it also puts out an uncropped version, which is a nice thing just in case. So auto crop would be the first line of defense. The second thing, Norm, would be absolutely, first thing I do is check for anything that needs to be cropped. And if I haven't auto crop that out, because you're talking about hundreds, thousands of bad pixels that are going to figure into the calculations done by DBE or GraXpert or color calibration, whatever it is.
Okay. I think Eric has all the questions. There's a couple of things I want to say. Terry was working very hard tonight, making sure that you got as much scale. I mean, you could actually see a lot of the formulas that and a lot of the details in the PixInsight work that Warren was doing. And to do that, he has to actually draw a little square on the screen and say, I want this to go out. And he stretches his screen back and forth and things like that. And he's doing that all in live in real time. And that's really good job tonight, Terry, making sure that everybody could see that stuff. And I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. I think that wraps it kind of up for tonight. Has anybody else got anything we need?
Warren, you can stop sharing if you want.
Yeah, you can stop sharing. You can come on back and join us live here. So thanks everybody. Go ahead.
And before we end the show, if you'd like to hang with us a little bit and
sure
gossip.
Sure. Right? Yeah, I think most of the presenters just want to present so that they can hang with us afterwards. I think that's the real reason they do it. Yeah. Anyway, Terry, Tim, Molly, and Patrick all have streaming responsibilities within our organization, and we're all getting better at this all the time. So we really appreciate the efforts that they put into making this thing work. Good night, everybody. Have a happy Mother's Day if we didn't mention it. We hope there are a lot of mothers out there, and we all had a mother, both, even though we're kind of nerdy astro imagers, we had a mother once upon a time. So thank you all very much. for being here tonight. Good night. Hope to see you next week.
Good
Bye-bye.
night, everyone.
Take us out,
See you
Terry.
next week. Bye-bye.